Hello, I am Zinfogel. Alright, I am tardy to the party, but we have yet to talk about some banners in the December Datamine. So, without further ado, let's get started. Following the chronological release order, first up we have Kimono Grimsley and Bisharp, a Steel type 5-star tech. Grimsley is a pseudo striker. This stat spread heavily favors offense, but in exchange, Bisharp is a slow and fragile unit. Now, Bisharp's whole gimmick is Metal Burst, and the kid revolves around it. This move is tough to understand if you are unfamiliar with Wallace's mirror code. For a quick rundown, when you use Metal Burst, Bisharp enters a countering posture where it waits for the enemy to damage it. You cannot perform any actions while countering, but you can manually break this stance by executing Metal Burst again. However, similar to White Guard, if you do that, you consume your one Metal Burst MP and nothing happens. So, when you satisfy a Metal Burst counter, you retribute an attack to the enemy that hit you. Note you cannot redirect the Metal Burst wherever you want. The retaliation goes to the attacker. And the counter doesn't advance the sync countdown, so Metal Burst inherently delays your sync. However, notice a key detail here. The more damage you receive, the more powerful this move becomes. Under ideal circumstances, you want the enemy to drop you from full health down to 1 HP for the full brunt of a Metal Burst. And when done right, the results are staggering. Metal Burst easily ranks amongst the strongest attacks in the game. If you want a taste for how powerful countering moves are, I heavily recommend Tosakinto's channel. It will be linked in the description. Tosakinto is the resident Wallace expert, and he routinely breaks 20k damage off-type with Mirror Code in all sorts of content. And Mirror Code is functionally identical to Metal Burst, with the key difference that Metal Burst activates regardless of the category of the move you are countering. Mirror Code can only activate against special moves. Now, Grimsley's trainer move allows you to play Metal Burst to its fullest extent. This maximizes Grimsley's offensive stats in one use. It adds super effective up next, it adds endure, and it tanks both of his defenses. However, we also have this unique passive called Grimsley's Gambit. When Bisharp uses Metal Burst, this passive calls aggro towards it, and after countering, it neutralizes Grimsley's stat drops while maximizing his evasion. And with full First Aid, Bisharp gets a free restoration back to full health. Grimsley's Kid allows you to use Metal Burst with 0 drawbacks. He has the equivalent of a gun with 1 round in its magazine. If you know a big attack is coming, you can cast Metal Burst to absorb the damage, delete whomever attacked, and go back to maximum HP. With the defense drops and endure, it's very easy to pull off a fully powered Metal Burst, and thanks to the evasion buffs, Grimsley can attempt to dodge attacks while Metal Burst aggro wears off. Alternatively, you can use Phoebe or Lycia to take the aggro away instead of waiting, but case in point, it's a perfectly viable strategy. Now, the rest of Grimsley's Kid is equally as capable. He's got a Screech. As you'll know, I love debuffing, but I am not the biggest fan of this particular move. It's not as spammy as Leer, and it's a single target, but given Grimsley is buffing efficiency, he can spare the turns to use it. Bisharp is other offense is the less impressive Ironhead. It has a 30% chance to flinch for utility, but this is one of the weaker Tribar moves. Steven and Mega Metagross have 70 more attack than Grimsley, and they routinely get memed on for having poor DPS. However, Grimsley does have Insult to Injury at 3-5, which is an amazing multiplier that fixes Ironhead. It's based on defense debuffs, which is a cohesive function when the debuffs themselves already enhance your damage. And Screech is a proactive means of buffing this multiplier. Speaking of, Grimsley also has innate Relentless. The more you debuff defense, the stronger your nuke. This heavily incentivizes the use of Screech. And with Haymaker at 3-5, Grimsley has a very strong nuke that's easy to set up. Overall, Kimono Grimsley is solid. I cannot even call Metal Burst a funny gimmick because Grimsley's kit lets you use it very effectively with calculated timing. It's very abusive in Champion Stadium and Legendary Arena where there are scripted attacks. And Screech is good utility that synergizes in Steel Dual Strike. Grimsley can complement physical Steel type strikers with debuffs and Steel theme skills. As for cons, Grimsley is fully self-sufficient, but he suffers from gauge issues, and he is very vulnerable to spread damage until Metal Burst resets his debuffs. But that's about it. He rarely has downsides once you get the hang of Metal Burst. I would recommend running him with Skyla, I suppose, just any defensive partner that can aid his playstyle. And if you want to play harder for Relentless and Insult to Injury, I would suggest Taken Magneton. It's a secondary Screech user that activates Steel type skills. As for the grid, 1-5 has nothing, but Metal Burst deletes stuff anyway, so it doesn't matter. 2-5 has MGRs and this new passive called Trainer Move Bow 09. When Grimsley uses his trainer move, he applies free move next, which really helps his gauge management. It lets you launch Metal Burst or Ironhead for free. 3-5 has the funny number multipliers. You have Haymaker, which you immediately max out, plus the sinking tiles. Insult to Injury scales both Metal Burst and Ironhead. You have Harry 3, which plays off Ironhead Aggravation 1. That's a 60% chance to flinch the enemy for excellent crowd control. And Metal Burst Critical Strike 3, as if it needed a bump in damage. Metal Burst borderline breaks the Geneva Conventions. There is also Metal Burst NPR 4, but Grimsley is unlikely to pull off the same trick twice in a row, especially if he already spent his Endure. And then there is this new passive called Risky Counter 9. When Grimsley executes Metal Burst, it lowers the sync countdown. This makes up for the lost turn spent using it. Lastly, there is Critical Healing 2 for a 30% chance to restore regeneration tier health when you land a crit, but full first aid is recovery suffices, so I wouldn't necessarily go out of my way to grab that. Your standard Grimsley grid looks like this, just all your relevant multipliers and Metal Burst tools. But if you want to flinch stuff, then you can drop Metal Burst Critical Strike 3 and grab Iron Head Aggravation 1 as well as Harry 3 to capitalize off of that. Grimsley is very straightforward. He is brainless and barely requires support. He has an excellent Zinc Nuke and Metal Burst fixes his DPS. He is a great unit for a general pool Zinc pair. Up next, we have classic Elesa and Emolga, an electric type Pokefair tech. And because she's a Pokefair, that means she's amazing, right? Right? Emolga has incredible stats, very reminiscent of Custom Dianta. Great offense, great bulk, good speed. You can tank with this if you want, but Emolga lacks recovery, so it's not a recommended application. The real issue here is that Emolga's attacking moves are Thundershock and Nozzle. This is Sophocles 2.0. Elesa's Grid tries to meme with some Nozzle multipliers, but it's just not worth the effort. The base power of Elesa's moves derails her offensive presence. However, Elesa has the stats to back up her Zinc Nuke, and as a byproduct, she has potent max moves as well. Emolga can Dynamax, by the way. Elesa is one of those techs who revolves around utility. She has a great nuke when enhanced by electric terrain, but her DPS doesn't exist. You kinda have to partner her with someone capable of carrying the pace of a fight. Regardless, Thundershock is a spammy one-bar move. Nozzle guarantees paralysis, and it becomes spread thanks to this new passive called Barrel Hit 9. Complemented by Entry Freebie, Elesa enters the field, clicks Nozzle, and automatically spreads Paralysis Synergy and Static Shock to enable other strikers. Similar idea to Palentine's Arena. Now, when Emolga attacks a paralyzed target, it also activates this new passive called Shock Factor 9. It globally debuffs a paralyzed target, everything ranging from their offense to their defense, and it procs when you click a Nozzle to begin with. Emolga can bring an enemy down to -3 attack, etc. before First Sync, so you can use her to complement other Sync nukers. I think this is why I got a couple messages excited for the prospect of Elesa showcases. Debuffs are my thing. I am a filthy sleuth for debuffs. However, I need to clarify I don't whore myself for any debuffer. The debuffs I really like are AoE. Champion Iris and Masker Royal rank amongst my favorite sync pairs because their debuffs are applicable on endless scenarios. They crowd control enemy damage while dropping their defense. This is twofold. They make stages easier to tank and easier to damage, and their debuffs are faster ramping. Elesa, on the other hand, has single target slow ramping debuffs. These debuffs are of amazing quality, but at best, you can only neutralize center with them. This neglects sides, and that's where the real potency of debuffing moves like Leer comes into play. You are trading the potential for dual strike to make the entire enemy field squishier, which Elesa doesn't accomplish. Shock Factor 9 is great, but it could have been so much more. Now, Elesa's remaining utility is defensive. She has Light Screen to filter special damage, and her trainer move raises special defense for the party by a couple stages. She has a very positive matchup against special foes like Electric Weak Caitlyn or Acerola. This trainer move also drops the sync countdown by -1 to counteract the turn lost using a max move. And it raises Elesa's special attack by 4 stages. Unfortunately, Elesa is not self-sufficient, so if you want her to nuke, she needs crit support. Speaking of, Elesa's innate tech multiplier is the same one that Champion Iris and Anniversary N have. The more you debuff stats, the greater the nuke. This has a higher ceiling than standard sync multipliers. It caps out at -18 debuffs, and it's meant to be played off Shock Factor 9. Again, placing emphasis on debuffing center to bomb them afterwards. In all fairness, Elesa has a strong nuke. You won't hear me complaining about that. So, let's check out the max moves. Both Thundershock and Nozzle become Max Lightning. Max Lightning sets electric terrain after dealing damage. This means that if you wanted to bomb with Max Lightning, you have to bring Vulner. But perhaps the intention is that Elesa herself compresses terrain for an electric type striker. Since Elesa's electric terrain has one use and lasts for so little, you gotta make the most out of that time frame with a 6-star EX nuke, for example. Now, both of these Max Lightnings have the exact same base power, but the key difference is that one is physical while the other is special. You can adjust Elesa's support accordingly. You brought Hilbert? Great, you can use Nozzle-based Max Lightning. But if you brought Sabrina, you can use Thundershock-based Max Lightning instead. Then Light Screen becomes our first instance of Max Guard. This allows you to apply Damage Guard next to an ally. As a refresher, Damage Guard next nullifies any instance of move damage, or it halves the damage received from an enemy sync move. This gives Elesa a clutch shield in case you have to eat a move that is too powerful to tank. And if you are not taking advantage of electric terrain, you might as well use this instead. So, Elesa is not a bad unit. This is typically the kind of tech I drool over. My qualm is that her utility is team dependent. It's not like Signal Leaf or Champion Iris where they are effective regardless of stage. You have to nitpick Elesa's partners. She plays best when you can abuse Paralysis or Electric Terrain. Elesa pairs superbly well with 6-star EX, N and Zekrom, for example. Besides theme skill activation, she paralyzes all foes to proc Static Shock and sets Electric Terrain for any Snook. And she also makes for a great Gachas partner. She activates his Paralysis Synergy tree and advances Pecking Order, Overpower, and his innate Cakewalk with her debuffs. Any team composition that Palentine's Serena enables, Classic Elesa also fits well. But she exchanges Gauge support for special defense utility and assorted debuffs. Elesa just doesn't enable enough archetypes for me to be excited about her. She is great for gauge management, her debuffs are potent, she filters special damage and spreads reliable paralysis, and if you really want to, you can bomb with Max Lightning or her Sync move. Don't let my pessimism stop you from pulling her if you want. She has good value in the correct structures. Anyway, 1-5 Elesa has Jackshot. Nothing new. 2-5 has the NPR in case you want to do some sync acceleration stuff. There is also MGRs and some stat tiles to emphasize bulk. You can also humor Mad Strength 3, but if you wanted to touch DPS Elesa, you should be using Hilbert anyway. 3-5 has all the fun stuff. Elesa gains another shock factor tile, but it's shock factor 1. That's a 20% chance of proccing. If this were shock factor 9, I would have been sold harder on this unit, but you cannot rely on the additional proc. There is also Thundershock Staggering 1, which allows Emolga to flinch. I like that. A spammy 1-bar flinching move is one of Skyla's claims to fame. Down this corner we have Max Shielding Strikes 2. I misread this back on Classic Red is analysis, which I apologize for, but when you use a max move, it raises Emolga's defense by 2 stages. If Elesa is tanking, it's appreciable, but the lack of recovery makes that iffy anyway. And then we have Max Static Shock 3. When the target is paralyzed, Max Lightning gets a damage bonus. It plays cohesively with Nozzle, so it's a good grab for Elesa's bombing mode. Over this side we have defensive tiles. Light screen stuff with Barricade Bodies 1, it's a 20% chance of proccing a special defense buff for the party. It's never going to happen under regular circumstances when you are using light screen twice at best, so it's a safe skip. But we do have Max Barricade Bodies too. This one does buff the entire party's special defense by a couple stages when you use a max move, so this makes Elesa a much more solid, especially defensive support. Lastly, we have Nozzle tiles with Paralysis Synergy 4 and Super Duper Effective 4. No thanks, I'd rather use DPS Sophocles. I don't know what the fuck to do with this unit. You can play for a defensive max mode. You can rotate the Shock Factor 1 with Thundershock MGR3 for better gauge consistency. Or you can focus on Elesa's bombs. I think Staggering 1 and Shock Factor 1 are compulsory. The chances are rare, but Elesa is a utility sync pair at heart, and if you happen to proc this, her utility is better. Ultimately, we kinda have an expectation of quality for utility techs, and Elesa is a notch below what we're used to. It's time to get jolly, my dudes! Here we have Nod Wulfric and Ice Rider Calyrex, a seasonal Ice-type striker. Before we even start, I acknowledge Holiday Leon is really strong, perhaps the best Ice-type striker in the game. He is an excellent source of reliable damage with a strong crowd control. My problem is that he doesn't do anything unique, which kills my excitement. So, Calyrex has a standard striker spread with a gargantuan 500 attack. This massively improves its output. Calyrex is a little slow and squishy on the special side, but it's nothing a support cannot take care of. Leon's only offense is Glacial Lance. It's a standard 4-bar move, no upsides with no downsides, but Glacial Lance is AoE, so it's hard to use for denials. However, it gives Calyrex a strong play as a DPS unit with a 6-star EX support buff or in conjunction with Leer spam. Now, the rest of Leon's moveset is composed of trainer moves, just like Eternatus. Leon can maximize crit and speed, but he has one of the shittier trainer moves we have seen in a while. This only buffs attack and defense. There is nothing special about it. As a matter of fact, it's the same as Brock and Onyx's trainer move, but with a fresh coat of paint. Leon behaves as an old age striker. He needs multiple turns to complete his setup without auxiliary support. However, Leon has this new passive called Mighty Command at 9, When Leon uses any trainer move, Calyrex gains a physical move up next buff. DNA basically went, no, if we give a striker a buffing kit, you're supposed to buff, please buff. In case you are unfamiliar with Bosma, here is a quick refresher. Physical move up next makes your next physical move 40% stronger, but this multiplier stacks. You can stack up to 10 buffs for a 400% increase in damage, so Leon is not punished for spamming trainer moves per se. Overall, Mighty Command has worse DPS than constantly attacking with Hilbert support, for example, but it compensates for the damage disparity of not attacking when you are unable to. Mighty Command gives Leon an interesting function in dual strike team compositions. While Leon buffs, another striker can eat up the gauges he's not using, and right before an enemy sinks, Leon can bomb them with a fully boosted Glacial Lance to end the fight. This is viable in Hala or Gachas dual strike. I have seen this mode piloted to success in Holiday Leon showcases, but I think the better way to play it is by using a 6-star EX support after stacking 3 Mighty Command buffs. You can quote-unquote store that damage post-sync for a stronger barrage, and then spam Glacial Lance. Nevertheless, I have to be explicitly clear that Mighty Command is Leon's weakest mode, but in practice, you get less damage than from purely spamming Glacial Lance. And Leon also misses the opportunity of abusing Cold Snap or his freeze multipliers, which gives him a higher pick. We will get to that in a bit. Leon also has Victory Flex too. When he knocks out an enemy, his attack raises by a couple stages. This isn't particularly useful in the 3v3 metagame. Enemies are too tanky to attempt the boost. Lastly, Leon has innate Cold Snap too, which gives him an important distinguishing niche. It gives Calyrex a 30% chance to freeze. Glacial Lance is AoE, but Cold Snap is an added effect. It doesn't have the standard spread move penalty, where secondary effect chances get cut in half. And as a bonus, when Calyrex procs freeze, it disables the entire enemy field at once. This works exactly the same as using Cold Snap to Gachas. If I wasn't clear back in his analysis, it's an amazing and underrated application. AoE Freeze is like proccing AoE Sleep. It prevents damage and delays the enemy. Furthermore, Leon has freeze multipliers. Freezer Burn is realistic with 6-star EX Leon because his freezes are AoE. When all is said and done, Leon is really good. He is versatile and Mighty Command helps with issues other strikers normally have. Diantha and Gardevoir would kill for a passive like this. However, if I wanted an AoE freezer, Gachas exists and is very serviceable. And if I wanted a 6-star EX Ice-type Nuker, there is Hala, who is significantly easier to set up. So that's the caveat. Leon is not a bad pull, but there are alternatives who are as serviceable. Now, 1-5 Leon has, you guessed it, nothing. Just a Snow Shelter for mild synergy in Hail modes alongside Holiday Nessa or Candice. 2-5 is more interesting. Leon gets NPRs for all his trainer moves, which plays nicely in a Mighty Command mode. If Leon caps his stats, he can keep stacking physical move up next buffs even when his trainer moves fail. Then we have the multipliers. Freeze Energy and Freezer Burn are viable because of Cold Snap 2 is potency, but Freeze is wild when it comes to duration. Freeze strategies are complex, then therefore it's easier to go for Leon is Hail multipliers. With Holiday Nessa and Candice's Grid, Hail Leon is very viable. The full grid has the funny numbers, most important of which is Glacial Lance ramming speed. This massively improves Leon's DPS and helps him contend with some of the big name strikers like Custom Dianta. Leon can handle this with X Speed Plus fortunately, which at the same time benefits Mighty Command. Speaking of, Leon also has Mighty Rush 9, which gives him a physical move up next buff after sinking. But the energy needed for it lacks value relative to his multipliers. Besides that, Leon has random garbage like Sync Freebie, Stamina Reserves, and Super Victory. Very situational, but it's there. Now, Leon gets additional tiles for sync multipliers we already saw on his 2-5 grid. With Heavy Hail 7 and Freezer Burn 7, his 6-star EX nuke is a lot scarier. Heavy Hail Leon has similar potency to Hala, while Freezer Burn Leon is closer to Steven and Mega Metagross. Needless to say, Heavy Hail is easier to use. Freezer Burn is conditional and you have to time your nuke with the freeze proc, but 3-5 Leon has Cold Snap 1. We should sit on this for a bit. With this style, Leon can freeze lock enemies with near certainty, as long as he receives proportionate gauge support. It's around a 44% chance. And by playing Leon alongside freezers like Price or Gachas, Freeze is very consistent, and it has the benefit of stopping enemy damage. I have seen a lot of Leon showcases, but Freeze is being overlooked. This stems from the fact that Freeze is an underexplored playstyle. Personally, I don't feel qualified to talk about it. At best, I have used Gachas plus Price and clumsily at that, but I learned a few things about it. So, playing Freeze is like playing Flinch with a couple key differences. Freeze elapses randomly. This is both good and bad. At Listen Freeze Aid, enemies can stay frozen for longer than you would expect them to, or they can thaw out immediately. Second, Freeze elapses with the passing of time. Physical actions like move animations or regeneration eat away at the duration of Freeze. Freezer Burn Leon suffers from the awkward problem of not being able to time his nuke when you want. He should always Q last so he can immediately sync as soon as you see a freeze proc. Even with proper timing, center can thaw out before you launch the nuke. But at least sides stay frozen consistently, so you can almost always nuke them. This behavior is less punishing for his DPS mode. You don't lose nearly as much damage from missing free Synergy 2 than from missing the sync multiplier. But I just thought I would let you know. Don't be scared to try a pure Freeze Leon. Crowd control is extremely potent, and there is ways you can manage your turn sequence to mitigate Freeze RNG. As an example, if you pair Cold Snap Leon with Gachas, you have like a 60% chance of proccing Freeze per cycle. But a party like that demands Ingo to erase gauges. Also, if you attack right when Freeze toss out, you still get the Freeze multiplier. It just works like that, it's a little weird. Freeze Leon is legit. If I pull Leon, it will be to explore this specific playstyle, and I hope other people pick up on it. Anyway, Leon is ideal team compositions focus on fixing gaps on his buffing, fixing his gauge, or letting him focus on Mighty Command, all of which are viable. For example, let's say you do Hilbert plus Holiday Nessa. You can enable Leon's Hail Nuking mode with that. If you want to enable his Freeze Nuking mode, you can play Ingo plus Gachas for AoE freezing. But you can play Signature Blue plus Price instead for a DPS freezing mode and never let enemies attack you. Overall, Leon is really strong. He off-types easily when given the correct investment and partners. But you see, I don't feel he hard carries teams for me to consider him a top-tier striker. Leon has buffing fallacies and his nuking modes are conditional. I am trying dailies on him, but this is the kind of unit I will probably regret not hard pulling down the line, just like Palentine's Arena. Up next, we have Holiday Nessa and Eiscue, a seasonal Ice-type tech. I am not sure if I will get the chance to listen to her awkward voice acting, but she's an interesting unit because she heralds a neglected playstyle. Nessa summons Hail. Now, I talked about Hail at length back on Candice's analysis. I don't want to repeat myself, so you can listen to that. But in summary, Hail is underwhelming because Hail abusers are far in between. They usually have better multipliers to use than Invigorating Hail, and those applications don't demand dragging down your team with ungridded Candice and Teclapras. Furthermore, the best Hail abusers don't stand up to the other weathers. Like Psychic Terrain has Signature Lusamine and Giovanni, Sand has Emmet and Raihan. Let's not even touch on Sun and Rain. And Hail's best user is perhaps Holiday Leon, who can play for other modes. So Nessa here is attempting to fix the Hail archetype, but this is not the second coming of Ingo. Nessa is very flexible and has a myriad of potent applications, but she's not a pure enabler. Her team compositions require forethought. Anyway, Nessa has a really good stat spread. She has no fallacies in either damage nor bulk, but do note Eiscue interchanges forms mid-battle. Just keep in mind, Ice Phase has more bulk, and Noise Phase sacrifices said bulk for speed. As for moves, we have Powder Snow. It's mostly for utility. It's a very spammy move for gauge emergencies. Powder Snow has a 10% chance to freeze. It becomes 5% when spread. It's worth noting Powder Snow has a notoriously slow animation, and Nessa provides regeneration support used like Glacia. Powder Snow spam is like one of Glacia's best applications. It's handy, especially with Defense Crush 2 as a lucky skill for AoE defense drops. The problem is that Nessa has much stronger tools at her disposal, but you can humor this. It's actually decent. Next, we have Icicle Crash. It's a decent 3-bar move with a 30% chance to flinch. It gives Nessa some crowd control, and she can fix its accuracy with a tile on her base grid. When fully invested, Nessa has higher DPS than Summer Steven. She is fairly strong. Then we have the Trainer move. It's similar to Dreadnought is. This buffs +2 attack and +1 crit, but when the weather is hail, it gives AoE regeneration to the party. Nessa comprises recovery support, which is phenomenal. One issue here is that Nessa is unlikely to complete her crit buffs. She only has an NPR2 for her trainer move, and Sharp entry is fairly expensive energy-wise. Then there is Hail, the whole point of this unit. Nessa's Take multiplier is based on this weather. Next, we have the passives. Innate Snow Shelter immunizes Nessa from Hail chip damage, which also preserves Hail duration. If you are unaware, Sand and Hail suffer from an issue where weather recoil eats away at their duration. So they normally wear off quicker than Sun or Rain. Hasty Hail 3 turns Nessa into a gauge battery, but don't expect it to be spamming moves like crazy without Hail Pep Rally on her 2-5 grid. Lastly, Eiscue's unique passive is Ice Phase. It works similarly to the main series games. Ice Phase works like a shield. When it's up, Eiscue is completely immune to physical damage. But when it does absorb a physical hit, the Ice Phase breaks. You change to Noise Phase form and you will receive damage normally. However, you can reset Ice Phase by casting Hail. Nessa has a very interesting tanking mode with Hail NPR4, where she can constantly spam Hail to cook physical damage. This is an underplayed application, and I will tell you how to best employ it. So, Nessa is a strange hybrid between Summer Steven, Candice, and Glacia. She is a self-sufficient weather support with several viable modes. She can function as a DPS, as a sync nuke, as a flinch bot, as a buffer, as a physical tank, as a gauge support. I could go on. Nessa has endless applications. But is this really what Hail needs? Every Nessa mode has an equivalent sync pair, with the only distinct difference being Hail compression. I don't feel Nessa is necessary for Hail to succeed, because the playstyle will soon have Candice's grid, and she gives Hail proportionate offensive pressure with her sync nuke. Candice actually out-nukes Nessa. Eiscue is very run-of-the-mill when it comes to its sync nuke. So Nessa doesn't necessarily outclass Candice. Candice compresses Hail with a nuke, so you can afford a support instead, where Nessa could have fit the function. I am not certain how to feel about this unit. Nessa is a jack of all trades, a master of few, but I don't feel she propels Hail to a level where she fixes the playstyle, like Ingo did with Sand. And this mostly stems from the fact that we have yet to witness a strong Hail abuser, where packing the weather would make it a superior option. I would suggest Holiday Nessa if you have a couple Hail abusers and the resources to take her to 3-5. You can squeeze every drop out of her utility then. So 1-5 is decent for what it's worth. It has Icicle Crash, MGR3 and Accuracy, making it a consistent offensive tool. 2-5 has Hail NPR4. I normally don't go crazy over weather NPR. I am of the philosophy that matches should end by the time you need to cast a weather thrice. But because of how clunky Hail duration can be, it's a good safety net. And NPR4 is a 50% chance. You will get this with near certainty. More importantly, there is also Hail Pep Rally 1. That's a guaranteed speed buff for the party when casting Hail. Ice Phase is impossible for physical stages to overcome. Say, all Bruno and Marshall iterations in Champion Stadium. So, what you can do is spam Hail for the Ice Phase shield while stacking party speed buffs. That can be quite good. In a similar fashion, Speed Skating 4 offers a 50% chance to buff Eiscue is speed when Ice Phase is up. This is for off-tanking, but it helps gauge management in DPS modes. Here we also have Healing Hail 1. Regeneration provides enough recovery as is, but with this, Nessa can end at full health in a few turns. Powder Snow, Hostile Environment 1 and MGR3 help with the pseudo-glacial mode I mentioned earlier, but Nessa is better off playing for Icicle Crash DPS. And we also get Trainer Move NPR2, which offers complete offensive autonomy. But I think Nessa teams want Hilbert support anyway. Full Grid has the fun stuff. As for multipliers, we have Invigorating Hail 3, Ramming Speed, and Ice Blow 3. You should be acquainted with the former two, but Ice Blow is new. If Eiscue Ice Phase is up, and if Eiscue deals super effective damage, you get the Ice Blow multiplier. But with Invigorating Hail and Ramming Speed alone, Nessa has better DPS than Summer Steven already. Then we have Hail Super Preparation 9 and Soften Up 1 to guarantee Nessa is nuking mode. If you plan to nuke with Nessa, I would heavily suggest the 6-star EX. Her outfit is amazing, but more importantly, she gains a pseudo multiplier with it. Then there is Hail Team Fierce Infliction 4. That's a 50% chance to buff the party's attack when Nessa spams Hail, and this plays perfectly with the Ice Phase cooking mode. While Nessa spams Hail to block physical damage, she can buff speed and attack to help Hail abusers set up quicker. Holiday Leon and Summer Steven love that. This mode can enable a couple Hail abusers, but again, pure Hail structures sit below other weathers, and Nessa herself can function as Hail DPS when supported by Rosanta or something. Lastly, Nessa also has Sharp Entry 1. This is much more consistent than her Trainer Move NPR2 to maximize her crit, but the problem is that it takes 16 energy to grab at a minimum, and it's tough to feed in most of her grids. The standard on-type Nessa grid I would recommend would be like this. Just play her as a DPS unit to chunk enemies with Icicle Crash. Alternatively, you can get lazy and play for a 6-star EX Tech Nuke with Hail Super Preparation 9, but remember that Candice nukes harder than Nessa anyway. Off-type, I would suggest pairing Nessa with Rosanta and taking Aggravation 1 for crowd control so you can delay enemy damage. Lastly, there is the Hail cooking mode I mentioned about thrice by now. The idea is activating Ice Phase constantly to block physical damage while providing relevant buffs to the party, and it can feed Aggravation 1 too. Ultimately, Nessa is really fun and insanely versatile. But I am fine with Candice, and she doesn't need my wallet for her full potential. Last but not least, we have Sonia and Yamper, the latest unholy god of supports. Sonia is so good, in fact, she contends with Signature Blue and Ingo, and that's not the kind of thing I say lightly, especially for a general pool sync pair. Sonia has really good stats. Yamper is meant to tank. This bulk is about as good as Signature Blue Pre-Mega. Surprising coming from a Corgi. Sonia's offense doesn't matter. More importantly, she has an excellent speed stat. And this is an area where supports like Signature Blue and Leaf falter at times. They buff speed, but the raw stat itself can be difficult to work with until you rack those speed buffs. Sonia doesn't have that issue. If she buffs speed, she becomes a gauge battery, sort of like Sabrina. And oh boy, does she generate speed. We'll get to that in a bit. Let's check out Sonia's moveset. She has a Tackle. A one-bar spam is a large reason for why Skyla and Leaf are as effective as they are. They are capable of advancing the sync countdown without interfering with the gauge management of a striker. Sonia also has Potion, which is now more OP than ever for damage sustainability. Potion allows you to absorb heavy hits and make up for mistakes. So far, we have a kid that's functionally identical to Leaf and Skyla. Next, we have Spark. It's niche for the most part. It has a 30% chance to paralyze, and you can enhance it with Spark Hostile Environment 1 on Sony's grid. Spark is a tool to enable paralysis synergy or static shock for other strikers, and it helps in legendary arenas with status gimmicks. But this move is really weak. Even when backed by insult to injury, its damage is negligible. So this is not like Leaf, who can pseudo-strike with Iron Tail. And now, the crux of Sonia is power. Her trainer move raises attack and defense by a couple of stages for the party. A little whatever, but it packs both offensive and defensive utility. However, Sonia's grid changes everything. At 3-5, she gains trainer move Critical Squad 1 and MPR 2. She effectively has Hop is buffing Kid. This means Sonia has the capacity to maximize the offense of the entire party by herself. She is a superb tank with a potion who enables fast offense, sort of like Ingo. And we are not done yet, because we haven't talked about Sonia's passives. Team Swift Reaction 9 gives the party a guaranteed speed buff when Yamper receives damage, and Catalyzing Recovery casts Gauge Acceleration when Potion is used. Sonia not only compresses all the offensive and defensive needs of a party, she also functions as Gauge support, perhaps at a better effectiveness than Rosanta. Sonia cannot directly support ramming speed or inertia like Fall Kaelin can, but with a one-bar spam and Gauge Acceleration, all physical strikers have no issues spamming moves alongside Sonia. The only support who enables Gauge better than Sonia is Ingo, and that's due to the fact that his trainer move erases Gauge usage. And as the cherry on top, Sonia has Defense Crush 9 for guaranteed defense debuffs. It doesn't matter that Jumper cannot deal damage. Physical strikers can leech off its debuffs to enhance their offense. I shouldn't need to explain why Sonia is good. If you have had a taste of Champion Stadium 2K Master Mode, you should know what team compositions demand at that point. Sonia is the kind of sync pair I use in Bad Meme Sundays to fix shitty units. Her roll compression is unreal. Now, I think it's more useful to talk about Sonia's weaknesses because she does have issues, and it's part of the reason for why people doubt she should be tiered alongside Signals of Blue. First off, Sonia doesn't buff a special attack or special defense. She is not globally splashable. Second, Sonia ruins quad Qs. Team Swift Reaction 9 is a reactive passive and it always procs when Jumper gets hit. This means it forces requeuing, and Sonia lacks adrenaline to make up for it. Third, Sonia cannot reliably proc her trainer move point refresh. It's a 30% chance. Similar circumstances to Fall Caitlyn. Given Sonia's playstyle, ideally you want to reset for that so she can maximize attack and crit, and allow your strikers to focus on damage. That can be annoying. In spite of that, Sonia is a really good fit for the current metagame. I would prefer using her over Signature Blue, honestly. The metagame right now is fast offense, which Sonia enables, but unlike sync pairs like Hilbert, Sonia has Potion for a defensive backbone. She's more comparable to Hop in this regard. Sonia offers better gauge, but I don't think she necessarily outclasses him. I mean, I know I have the fucking Samacenta icon and I am biased, but if you are not using Samacenta for DPS, then what are you doing? I don't have team recommendations for Sonia because you can pair her with literally any physical striker, even garbage like Beedrill and Scolipede, and Sonia enables them. Now, one big caveat to Sonia is that she's whatever until her 3-5 grid. Sort of like Hilbert. His trainer move Critical Squad is what pushes his kid to new heights. Sonia has decent potency with her buffs, gauge, and potions, but the crit buffs are what makes her busted. 1-5 has nothing. 2-5 has a few potion tiles and some whatever defensive tools. Spark Hostile Environment 1 offers a 60% chance to paralyze. It's nice for legendary arenas like Tornadus, Cobalion, and Yuxi. 3-5 is the crucial step for Sonia's godhood. Trainer move Critical Squad 1 and NPR 2 are compulsory on any Sonia grid, even if your strikers plan to spend a few turns buffing. Now, because of how much energy these tiles take, it's hard to customize Yamper, but we can make do. For the most part, potion tiles are a priority, but there is also Tackle Staggering 2, which is a very strong pick. The standard Sonia grid focuses on that. Otherwise, you can drop Tackle Staggering 2 for more potion consistency. Alternatives include Spark Team Fast Track 4 for direct speed buffs or Endurance, but you have to sacrifice Critical Squad or Potion tiles to make those happen. Lastly, I guess we can touch on Sonia's meme offense mode. Insult to Injury is a really good multiplier and Sonia herself scales it, but even Sophocles has a better DPS than Sonia. This is something you can humor for cheap damage in electric weak content, but it's not proper. Sonia is an excellent fit for the current metagame, especially with the 2K Master Mode demanding fast offense and big damage intakes. Sonia takes care of all of that, provided she's not messing around with special damage. But well, that's it for this video. I thank you again for your patience, but December is an awful month for me. But hey, I still managed to push this, so that's what matters. Thank you for watching, take care, and I hope to see you another time.